Okay. So, so this evening I'm going to explain a little bit about, as I mentioned earlier, for those that weren't here, that this text combines two different systems of meditation. They're closely related, and they both come from the same original source, which is Lama Atisha, who came to Tibet in the 11th century. It's a very famous Indian Buddhist master. And Atisha was famous for, especially for very pure ethics, moral discipline, and also for emphasizing the really kind of basic foundational teachings of the Dharma. So he taught, high tantric teachings as well, and so on. Was a great tantric master, but he recognized that the Tibetans, although the Dharma had been in Tibet for some 200 or 300 years before he came to Tibet, so it was well established, but the way of practicing was, in many cases, was not very pure, shall we say, and that comes down to that, people were practicing some of the high advanced teachings, especially the Tantra, but other kind of teachings as well, without having laid a solid foundation in the basic practices. And so these he always emphasized, and the Tibetans apparently gave him this nickname of the Refuge Lama, because everywhere he went, he taught on refuge. And he was very, very pleased, that they'd given him. They were kind of taking the mickey a bit, but, wherever he goes, he just teaches refuge. And he thought this was very good that they gave him that name, because in this perspective, if you like, in this sort of understanding of Buddhism that was represented by Lama Tisha and many of the other great Tibetan lamas, but also, of course, Indian masters before that, is that it's very difficult to overemphasize the importance of the practice of refuge. So there's this is very strongly emphasized in the text, and that's one of the reasons, because I think it's got quite extensive teachings on refuge. It's very important. So that's really the meditation that we've just done. Quite a lot was about that, and I'm going to really start each session with that meditation that we've just done, perhaps a little bit more briefly, because we'll also include one by one the other meditation practices, but always within this container, if you like, of taking refuge and receiving blessings from the Buddha in this way. So the text begins with actually talking about the source of the lineage. So it emphasizes Atisha, who was the one who not only brought the teachings to Tibet, but he the way that he put them together, his system of practice, which he designed especially for the Tibetans, although it has its sources in the previous Indian masters, but the way that he put it together in certain texts that he wrote, and also in the oral teachings that he gave to his main disciples. It's this which is has been passed down as these two systems of the Lamrim, the stages in the path to enlightenment, and the Lojong, the training of the mind. So although the text is itself is classified as a mind training Lojong text, but it incorporates a great deal of the Lam Rim. And as well as Atisha, who is a kind of, he's always identified as where the Lam Rim tradition comes from, and the Lojong tradition both. But also Lama Tsongkhapa emphasized the Lam Rim very much and wrote 3 major commentaries on the Lam Rim. And actually, so this text is by the first Dalai Lama, who was a direct disciple of Lama Tsongkhapa. And all of the Dalai Lamas have followed in Lama Tsongkhapa's tradition, the Gelug tradition. So this is our tradition. And Lama Tsongkhapa really kind of gave his own very distinctive, stamp on the Lam Rim teaching. So when we study Lam Rim in this tradition, it's normally Lama Tsongkhapa's version of Lam Rim or some commentary on one of his texts. So this text, I think we can say really it is also a commentary on Lama Tsongkhapa's Lam Rim Chenmo, or even maybe middle length Lam Rim. There were 2 more extensive ones called the middle length and the extensive, or the great exposition of the stages of the path. So this one actually follows the, I think it's possibly closer to the middle length Lam Rim, I'm not sure. Anyway, it also draws very much on Lama Tsongkhapa's presentation of the Lam Rim. So like that text, it also begins with discussing the source of the lineage. Where do these teachings come from? Because in the Tibetan tradition generally, it's regarded as very important that the teachings come from an authentic source. And what does that mean when we talk about a lineage? It means that so in this case, for instance, the root texts were written by a teacher, and their oral instructions were originally given by a teacher who himself had received instructions from an enlightened master and going all the way back to the Buddha. So in other words, not only the words of the instructions, but the spiritual realizations have been passed on from one generation to the next without any deterioration. So in other words, when we talk about a lineage, there's a series of teachers, beginning with the Buddha himself, who then, his Mahayana disciples and their disciples and so on, had all attained the complete realizations of this path. So this is regarded as very important at the beginning to show clearly how the teachings that are being given come from an unmistaken source. They come from an enlightened source. They are, completely reliable. And this gives us great confidence if we can understand this. So here, and more extensively in Lama Tsongkhapa's Lam Rim, it talks about the qualities of Atisha himself and his teacher, Lama Salingpa, and also the lamas from whom the first Dalai Lama received it. So this is the first section of the text. And so it begins, homage to the spiritual masters who are inseparable in nature from the yidams, the meditational Buddhas. Well, I won't go into great detail about yidams, what they are. We can just think, what's being said here is that these spiritual teachers through whom these teachings were passed down themselves had practiced to the degree that their mind was really, had become one with the mind of the Buddha. So in the meditation that we just did, we imagine that, because through imagining it, then progressively that becomes more and more the case, is the idea. Hopefully we find it works to some extent. We get a sense of, somehow like meeting with the mind of the Buddha. We get not just a dry intellectual understanding of what an enlightened mind might be like, but through the power of that image, the visualization, a more intuitive sense, a feeling of, this is what an enlightened mind feels like, if you like, So we bring that into our meditation. So, I tried to guide us into creating a little bit of that kind of space in the mind, first of all, mind being peaceful, calm, and clear. But then, using the image of the Buddha and talking about the qualities of the Buddha's mind to bring that into our meditation, to somehow get in touch with that quality of which is, and it's not something out there completely separate from us. It is, it's a state of our own mind that we can like tune into. It's that potentiality is always there, and we do have occasional moments where we experience it more deeply. And so through practicing meditations like this again and again, the idea is that over time, our mind more and more approaches that peace, that clarity, that insight, that compassion and loving kindness. All of these qualities together are, that's the nature of an enlightened mind. Okay. So yeah, so the first Dalai Lama mentions that there were different lineages of. He's talking here about the Lojong lineage, so he's not talking so much about the lineage of the Lamrim. And I guess that when he says, when he kind of classifies this text as belonging to the Lojong tradition, although he incorporates a lot of the Lamrim teachings as well, but he's identifying it as belonging to the Lojong tradition, particularly because he's relating it to this oral transmission lineage. So this oral transmission lineage is considered very important. It relates to the teacher from whom, if you're writing the text, you would give the name of the teacher from whom you received the oral teachings, right? It's not considered sufficient to have just studied texts. In order to have the lineage yourself, to pass it on to others, you at least have to have received it directly from someone who had received it, and so on, all the way back. And so he mentions there are different lineages, and in fact, he's received several of the 4 different transmissions. But the most important one seems to be that coming from this very important Lama called Geshe Chekawa, who was the author of the root text, the 7-point mind training. And this is one of the main root texts in the Lojong tradition. So Geshe Chekawa was, very renowned as, and all of these, they're known as the Kadampa Geshis. These were the disciples of Atisha and their disciples and so on, this lineage that came down, and eventually to Tsongkhapa, because so these Kadampa Geshes were the ones who were particularly the followers of Atisha, and they were practicing especially the Lojong teachings, also the Lamrim, but especially the Lojong. So they were famous for their selfless, altruistic attitude and their pure moral discipline more than anything else, and their humility as well. So they were the real examples of the Bodhisattva who has those qualities on a very deep level. So Geshe Cheka was one of the most famous. He was renowned for his selflessness and pure motivation and so on. And this particular lineage that coming from him, the first Dalai Lama says, it's on this lineage that he's based this text. And this lineage has come to him via Lama Tsongkhapa. He didn't receive it directly from Lama Tsongkhapa, although he did receive some teachings directly from Lama Tsongkhapa. But because of the difference in their, the date of birth, basically the first Dalai Lama was 24 when Tsongkhapa died, and he only met Tsongkhapa about 5 years previous to that. So he didn't receive, all of the different lineages from him. He received some important teachings directly from Tsongkhapa, but not this one. But he did receive it from one of Lama Tsongkhapa's main disciples. So this text is coming very directly from, through Lama Tsongkhapa. Yeah. So I'm talking about the lineage, really, and the fact that in essence, what we're saying here is when we receive these teachings, we should keep in mind, in some sense, this is coming through this continuous, it's being passed down in an unbroken chain from the Buddha himself. Okay, so even though Atisha is the person who put this particular structure together, if you like, of the mind training and the Lamrim, but it all comes from, ultimately, from the Buddha himself. So not just from texts or sutras, but from the direct realizations from one generation to another. So, I've also received these Lojong teachings from a number of teachers who have the lineage. So, although I can't claim to have any realizations myself, but nevertheless, this oral tradition, that comes down through the teacher is considered very important. It kind of carries a special blessing. So even though, as the Dalai Lama often says, there's a story about, one can obtain blessings from a dog's tooth. About there's this, it's a Tibetan lady whose her son was going on a pilgrimage to Lhasa, which was the thing, one of the great things that he would do in Tibet. They would go travel many hundreds of miles, because Tibet's a vast country. They would travel for months to go to Lhasa and go to the great monasteries and so on. And so the mother asked the son who was going on this pilgrimage to bring back a relic, of the Buddha or whatever he could find. So he went, and did his pilgrimage and so on, and come back, and got halfway back and remembered that he had forgotten to, find a relic. And what am I going to do? And he spotted on the road that there was a dog's tooth that had fallen out, and he picked it up and cleaned it and wrapped it in a special cloth and everything, and present it to his mother, saying, this is a tooth of the Buddha. And so she put it on the shrine, and made offerings and prayers to it, and received blessings and realizations. Because so if her mental attitude was, the right one, then she would receive the blessing. So even though, I have no particular qualities myself, then hopefully I'm able to transmit something through having received the teachings myself from people who certainly were practicing them very purely, especially Lama Zopa Rinpoche, but other lamas as well. So the first two lines of the root text then is on this point. This essential nectar-like oral teaching is the lineage coming from Holy Sir Lingpa. So Sir Lingpa was the teacher of Atisha. And Sir Lingpa actually, that wasn't his actual name, that's what he was always known as, because I think I think Serling is the Tibetan name for Indonesia. And this Lama actually lived I think he came from India, but he went, for some reason, he went to Indonesia. And it was from him that Atisha received the teachings on bodhicitta. Okay. So, in fact, it's often said that Atisha received the Lojong teachings from him. So that Lojong itself mainly emphasizes bodhicitta. Okay. So, although there's other points in the teaching, but you can say really that it is a teaching on how to develop the mind of bodhicitta. And this quality of bodhicitta, which means the mind of enlightenment, it's praised over and over again by all the great masters in this tradition as really the supreme spiritual quality that we should strive for above all else. The most important thing that, if we do nothing else in our life but work to develop bodhicitta, then our life has been very well spent. And it means, but specifically, we'll talk in more detail about this, but essentially, based on a motivation of compassion, but not just ordinary compassion, what's called great compassion, which means that it's not limited in terms of to whom it is directed. Okay, it's directed to all sentient beings. So we have compassion not just for a few, but for every single living being. And compassion not just for their one particular type of suffering, but for all the types of suffering that they experience. Even including, sentient beings who live in very high states of bliss, but they have not got the supreme happiness of complete enlightenment. Then from this point of view, that's considered that they are suffering because they are deprived of that. So even the most sort of subtle, even the smallest shortcoming from perfect, pure, unending happiness, then we would feel compassion towards somebody who doesn't have that, right? So this great compassion is the wish to free all beings from all suffering completely. But the bodhicitta adds something else to that, because that wish by itself is lacking in well, how, you know, how am I able to do this? I may have the wish to free all beings from all suffering, but I may not know how I can do that. And if we think about it, actually, it's not too difficult to understand that the only way that I would be able to do that is by becoming completely enlightened, by becoming a Buddha. And that's the reason to become a Buddha. That's actually the only valid reason to want to become a Buddha. You know, it's not, I don't need to complete perfect enlightenment in order to be free from suffering, from my own suffering. I can, there's a there's a difference between just being free from suffering and actually being fully enlightened, according to this Mahayana Buddhist view. I think you can even say, actually, even from the Hinayana view, that they recognize there's a difference between someone who is liberated from suffering, which we call an arhat, and someone who is fully enlightened, which we call the Buddha. Because, you know, even from the Hinayana or Theravada perspective, they certainly don't equate the arhats. There were many arhats in the time of the Buddha, but they're not placed on the same level as the Buddha himself. So clearly they recognize there's a big difference. And the difference is in the extent of the ability to free other beings from suffering. Okay, so it's only from the point of view of wanting to free others from suffering that we need this perfect enlightenment of Buddhahood. Okay, and so bodhicitta is the, if you like, the firm, or you can even say the unshakable intention to become a Buddha out of a motivation of compassion. Okay, because we want to free all beings from suffering. That is bodhicitta. And so Atisha traveled to Indonesia, which in those days was an extremely difficult and hazardous journey. It took 13 months to get from India to Indonesia, and all kinds of, you know, I mean, storms and pirates and sea monsters and goodness knows what that he encountered. It's a very, very hazardous and difficult journey, and he got there and then spent 12 years studying very, very intensely with Lama Tsolingpa. Now, at the time that he made that journey, he was already a very famous teacher in India, one of the most, you know, highly respected teachers in all of India. But he didn't think that he had, you know, deep enough realization of bodhicitta. And so he asked, you know, many people who could teach him. And that's why he ended up going to study with Tsolingpa. And although Atisha was known for his great guru devotion, he had I think 150 gurus, and you know, had great respect for all of them, but above all was to Tsolingpa. So even whenever Tsolingpa's name was mentioned, he would prostrate. And that's because he received the complete teachings on bodhicitta from Tsolingpa. So both Tsolingpa actually and his teacher, who is called, sometimes he's called Dharmakirti, sometimes he's called Dhammarakshita. But anyway, and it's a bit unclear and a bit confusing, because in other texts I've seen that Dhammarakshita is said to be the teacher of Tsolingpa's teacher, and in some texts he's said to be Tsolingpa's teacher. So a bit confusing. But Dhammarakshita wrote this text called The Wheel of Sharp Weapons, which is also included as a mind training text. So you can say perhaps the mind training does go back before Atisha Lojong tradition. It's a bit unclear. But anyway, what I'm saying really is that this Lojong tradition is considered to be very, very precious, because it's a very powerful way to develop bodhicitta, this practice. So that's why it says, you know, this essential nectar-like oral teaching is the lineage coming from Holy Ba. So this is these two lines are from the root text, okay, the 7-point mind training text written by Geshe Chekawa, which is very, very condensed. So there's quite a long section in the first Dalai Lama's text about this, much longer sections in other texts, giving the details of the lineage and the qualities of all the different masters who, you know, through whom it was passed down. But the essence is in those lines from the root text saying, you know, this oral tradition that's been passed down, which I've been fortunate to receive, is like something so precious. We compare it to nectar, you know, celestial nectar of the gods or whatever. Essential, I think, you know, it's true that the Lojong teachings do very much try to distill the essence of the Mahayana teachings. So, you know, there are many, many very, very extensive texts like 25,000 stanza perfection of wisdom and so on. But what's the real essence? What's the kind of, there's one quotation from Shantideva, you know, which says, it's bodhicitta is the quintessential butter from the churning of the milk of Dharma. You know, it's like, if we want to boil it down, what's, if we could only take, you know, one thing from this that would really contain the essence of all the Mahayana teachings. It's this teaching on bodhicitta and these two methods for developing bodhicitta, which is explained in the text, especially the second method, which is the method of exchanging self for others. So that's the main topic of the Lojong teachings. That's what we're going to be mainly studying over the next quite a number of weeks. So we'll go into some depth. This is the idea, you know. We may all have heard these, or I expect some of you have heard these teachings basically many times before, but I think I thought it would be very beneficial to really spend quite a long time with just this very essential point of exchanging self for others. Really right at the heart of our Mahayana practice. And these are very beautiful teachings, I think, for that. So I'm already kind of moving into the next section of the text, which is headed The Greatness of the Tradition. The excellence of the tradition is expressed in order to generate respect and inspiration within practitioners. So here the root text states, like a diamond, the sun, and a medicinal tree, thus should this text and its essential points be understood. So these are like three analogies, you know, to understand the specialness, the preciousness of these teachings. Okay. So he says, the first of the images given here is that of the diamond, and it is said that one should regard the words of this text as having the wondrous qualities of this extraordinary stone. So that's already saying something about how we should think about it. Isn't just that image and how we think of a diamond as this thing, you know, extremely precious. A diamond has 4 sides. That's interesting. I always think of a diamond as having 4 sides. So there is some kind of, in terms of physics, actually, there's some truth in that. I don't know where that comes from. But it says, any piece of that diamond also has 4 sides, each of which reflects light with a beauty able to outshine the radiance of any ornament of ordinary gold. So we know that diamond has this very special, this beautiful kind of brilliance to it, doesn't it? maybe some of it is added by our mind because we would think of diamond like that. But there's a reason, why diamonds is kind of have such a high place, within the jewelry world, why they're considered such a special stone. So it's a spiritual teaching like that. It's like a diamond. Yeah, moreover, a small fragment of this precious stone will still retain the name of diamond and will have the capacity to eradicate tremendous poverty. And this also, there's some lines from Shantadeva's guide reflecting that, he says, for example, so that in the translation I'm using, the bodhicitta is translated as awakening mind. Okay, so I said mind of enlightenment. Awakening mind means the same thing. And Shantideva says, the moment an awakening mind arises in those who are fettered and weak in the jail of cyclic existence, they will be named a son of the Sugatas and will be revered by both men and gods of the world. So with a lot of these images that he uses in this first chapter, the Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life, he's stating that something, the moment that our mind, that we're able to generate this mental state of bodhicitta, then we become somebody very special. And in a sense, our spiritual poverty, if you like, is completely eradicated in that one moment when that mind arises. So first Dalai Lama says, similarly, the practitioners who generate within their mind stream the essential wisdom embodied in a single passage of this instruction immediately outshine in greatness the qualities of the Shravakas or Pratyeka Buddhas. So these are the Hinayana practitioners, okay? They become known as bodhisattvas, even if they are yet unable to perform the mighty bodhisattva's deed. The insight that they gain immediately begins to counteract the spiritual poverty of the world. Okay. So what it's saying, on the one hand, that even the first moment that we have this mind of bodhicitta is already has, tremendous spiritual power. But also is saying that, because this text, because this system of meditation, if you like, this Lojong tradition is totally centered on this essential point of bodhicitta, then, even just any portion of the text, even just 2 lines, is carrying that same essence. You understand? Yes, there are 7 different points, and in each one there are, it's broken down into different sections and so on. So there's, many different aspects to the teaching. But if you like, this essence of bodhicitta pervades the whole the body of the Lojong teachings, if you like. So like the diamond, even the smallest fragment of it still has that extremely special quality. So again, the second analogy of like the sun, a single ray of the sun's light has the power to eliminate the darkness of an entire continent. It always heralds, its advent heralds full daybreak. So similarly, and the medicinal tree, the same, medicine made from all parts of this tree has the ability to cure disease, and so does the medicine made from any specific parts of the tree. So whether this is a real tree or not, I don't know. In the medical tantras, there is I think a tree is kind of semi-mythical. There is a medicinal tree that has the same name, but according to these, traditional texts, they have the idea there's this very special tree that can cure all diseases, and whether it's the fruit or the seeds or the leaves or the bark, each part of this tree has the same medicinal power. So similarly, this tradition, the Lojong tradition as a whole, shows the way to eliminate the illness of the deluded and distorted mind, which is based on the self-cherishing syndrome, and also how to eliminate the illness created by the obstructions to highest knowledge. And any portion of this instruction has the same function. Okay, so whatever, even if we just practice, one part of this, whichever part we choose, it is counteracting this self-cherishing mind, which is like the bodhicitta is the opposite of the self-cherishing mind, if you like. So bodhicitta is the quality that we want to develop, and the self-cherishing mind is the mental factor that we want to eliminate. It's the opponent, the enemy, if you like. So every line of these teachings is saying has the power to eliminate the self-cherishing mind, and therefore to actualize the bodhicitta, mind of enlightenment. And it says also to eliminate the obstructions to highest knowledge. So there it's referring to, there are, as I mentioned right at the very beginning, there's two types of two main spiritual qualities that we're seeking to develop, which is the compassion and wisdom. And there are also two types of bodhicitta connected with those. So there's, we'll go into the detail of that later on, but what's called conventional bodhicitta mainly is talking about compassion, the opposite of self-cherishing. But then what's called ultimate bodhicitta is mainly referring to the wisdom, understanding the ultimate nature of reality. It's more a question of emphasis, because the wisdom aspect is also present in the conventional bodhicitta, and the compassion aspect is also present in the ultimate bodhicitta. But the second one is mainly when it's talking about eliminating the obscurations to knowledge that is related to the wisdom aspect. Okay. So the compassion is the motivation, if you like, the motive force behind our progress to enlightenment. But the actual means to become enlightened is meditation on emptiness, which is the wisdom aspect. Understand? Compassion is the motivation, wisdom is the means. So we need both. So he says, any portion of this instruction has the same function. Integrating the tradition as a whole has this healing capacity, and so does integrating a specific aspect of the tradition. Right, so for example, we have these 7 points, 7-point mind training. So any one of them we could take as our, and so I think some of the Kadampa Geshes, they did that. They would just single out one particular aspect and just practice that, because they each in a different way kind of contain the essence. But of course the best thing is probably to practice all of them. And it's very concise. The Lojong tradition itself is very concise. There's a 7-point mind training. It's just, I don't know how many lines it is, maybe it's a few pages anyway, no more than that. We need to study a commentary in order to really understand the meaning of each of those, brief points. But nevertheless, then we can hold it in our mind very easily. It's one of the things about this. Once we've studied it, there are many very short and beautiful, actually poetic, texts which we could memorize. And once you've studied the commentary, once you've been through that process, then by memorizing the text, you have the whole teaching in your mind very easily. Okay. So this was, the first part, really talking about, as it said, in order to inspire us a little bit to talking about the very special qualities of this teaching, why it's so precious. So I'll stop there, and there may well be questions. So I hope there are. Otherwise, I'll have to keep talking. So yeah, please, if you have any questions, any points you'd like to explore, or any questions of any kind, please ask.
I didn't get the details of the book you said. Was a more modern, not equivalent.
Yeah. Right. Okay.
I got the title, but not anything else.
Yes. So it's Advice from a Spiritual Friend.
Mm-hmm.
And the two authors are Geshe Rabten and Geshe Darge. Yeah. Don't you say anything else?
Can I get a spelling of those? Because they're unusual names.
All right. Okay. So yeah. Geshe is Geshe, Geshe.
Mm-hmm.
Rabten, Rabten. And Geshe Darge, Geshe Ngawang Darge. Geshe Darge is Dhargye. Geshe Rabten was just called Geshe Rabten. What's it? Tim might know. Was his first name? What's Geshe Rabten's first name? Do we know?
I don't actually know that one. I could probably look it up, but but I can't recall it. I've usually heard referred to as Geshe Rabten. Yeah.
Or just referred to as Geshe Rabten. Anyway, you'll find it with those details.
Yeah.
It's originally published by the Library of Tibetan Works and Archives, but maybe it's been republished by somebody else. I'm not sure. It is. I think it's still available. Yeah, pretty sure. Yeah, it's still available, and it is a lovely text. So it contains two main texts, one by Geshe Rabten and one by Geshe Darge. The one by Geshe Rabten is the relevant one here. It's a commentary on the 7-point mind training, the same root text as the Dalai Lama's text. The other one is a commentary on a Lojong text by Atisha himself, and that commentary is by Geshe Darge. And it also has in it translation of a very important Lojong text called the 8 Verses for Training the Mind, a very short verse text by Geshe Langri Tangpa. Okay.
I was just going to ask David. So obviously, the self-cherishing mind is the antithesis, or the of bodhicitta. I suppose, yeah, like I've heard different teachers and stuff, because obviously, it's a different context in the West in the present day, and like quite a common issue that comes up with people is not that they're too self-cherishing, but that they don't cherish themselves enough or at all.
Yes.
So yeah, I've heard various different kind of I don't know, responses to that, or I just be interested to hear what you thought on I suppose being mindful of that difficulty and integrating it with the study of bodhicitta.
Very good question indeed, Sinjin. Thank you for that. So I think self-cherishing is possibly not the best translation. That is the most common translation. It's been the kind of it's, as it were, traditionally been. I mean, we're only talking like 50 years since the Tibetan Dharma's been in the West, but it's been very commonly translated as self-cherishing, and that, I think, that's misleading. I mean, it is definitely not the case that we shouldn't cherish ourselves. So now it's tending to be translated more something like self-centered, or even just selfish. And I would say, to put it quite succinctly, what is being talked about is the mental attitude of taking care of our own needs and wants to the neglect of others, right? So it isn't that we shouldn't, look after ourselves, our own mental and physical well-being. That's extremely important. But it's when we override the interests of others, when we are not considering the consequences for others of our actions, when we, hold ourselves as more, our own interests as more important than others. So I think we can all recognize this quality, at least when we see it in others, can't we? We think, that was a selfish action. That person was not, not caring about the fact that. So even though we may sometimes need to do things for our own self-preservation and our own well-being that might have some impact on others, that is not to their liking, or maybe even, might be causing them some degree of suffering, but we feel it's essential. But if we recognize that and we have concern about it, and we feel, well, yeah, I know it would be nice for this person if I would act in this way, but I really can't, make such a drastic sacrifice. We can actually, sometimes we can weigh up and say, well, look, really, I've got to look after myself here. That's more important than some small benefit that I might bring to somebody else. That might be okay, as long as it's the mental attitude underlying it that we do consider and have concern for the other person's well-being, rather than just completely ignoring it. Okay. I mean, I think this is something we can continue to explore, and the question doesn't go away very easily. But I do think, a lot of now, when compassion is being taught, I mean, I'm doing a training now in how to teach compassion in a secular format, but based on the Tibetan Buddhist, sources. But in that training, there's great emphasis on the importance of self-compassion, and this has been backed up by scientific studies. So it's very clear, I think now, that when teaching how to develop compassion, we should not neglect that aspect of self-compassion. One, I think, quite good response that I've heard given to the question, well, in the traditional teachings, where is self-compassion being taught? And this was from Geshe Tashi Tsering, who used to teach at Jamming London and also at Jamming Leeds. And he said, well, actually, when we look at what's really meant by this other quality of usually translated renunciation, which again I think is a bad translation. So it's said, traditionally we can't develop true compassion for others until we have developed renunciation. And what does that mean? Renunciation is, the reason it's a bad translation is because it kind of suggests of giving up any kind of pleasure, giving up having nice food, or giving up sleep, or whatever, giving up comfortable clothes and wearing a hair shirt, might be something like that. We think of renunciation in that kind of way. Well, it doesn't mean that. What you're announcing is the causes of suffering. Okay, and that's very clear in the teachings when the explanation is given of this quality. That's a more precise translation is something like definite emergence, which means the definite intention to get out of samsara, to become liberated from this state of suffering. So definite emergence or renunciation means to abandon the causes of one's own suffering, right? So you could say that is self-compassion, isn't it? Yeah. So that was Geshe Tashi's explanation, which actually, you know, for many years before had thought the same thing, but when Geshe Tashi said it, I thought, oh yeah, maybe I was right. So maybe it is in there, but in a less obvious form. But anyway, now with the scientific research that's been done on compassion and compassion training, it's become very clear that compassion for yourself is really important. And actually, and if you don't have that, then although it's not generally thought to be the case that you can't have any kind of genuine compassion, but it's problematic, it's limited. If you don't have compassion for yourself, then it's questionable whether your compassion for others is on a sound basis, you know. So thank you for that question, really important, and we will, you know, we'll revisit that, I'm sure, many times. Yeah. Any other questions? No subjects are off limits. Carol, did you have a question? Yeah, could you unmute so we can hear your question?
Yeah, sorry about that. I was just a bit slow. Yeah, I guess just when you that last sentence just kind of brought to mind about that equalizing aspect, you know, kind of equalizing ourselves.
Yes.
One for the other. It's kind of taking the other perspective, isn't it? But also sort of, yeah, so just quite like it just sort of linked a little bit. But my question really wasn't
good question, yeah,
to do with that really. It was just more of a contemplation, I suppose. But the question was just, I don't really know what the difference, I think I have a vague idea, but not 100% about the difference between just a Geshe and a Lama. Just kind of technical.
Yeah. So Lama is a very general term, and literally is actually just the Tibetan translation of the word guru. But it's kind of given as a sort of honorary title to any sort of respected spiritual teacher in Tibet. I mean, there are some particular things in certain traditions about who's a Lama and who isn't, but generally, you know, it's just kind of somebody who's recognized as a qualified spiritual teacher, I would say. But Geshe has actually two quite different meanings. So Geshe Rabten and Geshe Dalge, you know, these are from recent times. I think they both passed away now, but they were in the 20th century, late 20th, they came to the West, both of them. And in their names, Geshe Tashi, you know, it refers to the fact that they completed a very, you know, in-depth course of study in one of the great monastic universities, formerly in Tibet, but now in India. So it's sometimes said to be equivalent of a PhD. I think it's a bit more than a PhD because they do 20-year study, you know, and then they have the very, you know, in-depth examination where they debate and, you know, so they kind of demonstrate that they have internalized the meaning of all these great texts. This is what it means nowadays. But when we talk about the Kadampa Geshes, like Geshe Chekawa, it doesn't mean that. It wasn't that they passed some examinations, but it was more, again, there wasn't a specific thing like that, but they were the teachers who were, it actually literally means a spiritual friend. Okay, so in this Kadampa tradition, this title of the spiritual friend, the Geshe, was given to the great teachers who had these, particularly, you know, they were known for their qualities of simplicity and humility and very pure ethics and very selfless, altruistic motivation, compassion. Okay. So there are two meanings, I'm afraid. Like many things Tibetan, it's a little bit complicated. But I hope that answers the question. Yeah. Anything else? Be good to have one or two more, and then we'll just finish with a short meditation. so please do ask any. No questions are off limits. Except about football, I won't be able to answer those.
I was going to say, David, if you don't get any more questions, whether you would possibly use the time to repeat the meditation that you didn't record, because I found that really very useful.
Okay.
Or is it not appropriate?
It's well, I will say that I'll be doing essentially the same meditation each time, but then
Okay.
I'll be it may be a little bit less extensive, but you know, because I'll be bringing in the topics that we go through each week as well. So if that's okay, I apologize for getting to record.
It was the pacing that I liked very much.
it.
It was the pacing and the
Okay.
the timing. It was perfect.
Oh,
And when I do it myself,
yeah.
I have difficulty doing it that thoroughly.
All right.
But following your voice was,
Yeah. Okay.
it was right for me anyway at that moment.
Okay. Well, what I will do, Anne, so that you don't have to wait a week, I will look back and see, because it's a meditation that I do quite often. So there may be one from an earlier teaching that I can find that's very similar. But I thought perhaps we'd do a slightly different one to end with, because we're coming through to dedication. So yeah. But yeah, it would be great if somebody's got one more question. Otherwise, we will do that. Anything?
The difference between the Lojong and Lam Rim, a bit more, just to go over that again, it'd be helpful for me. I got that Lojong was, you described it as a mind training system, I think.
Yes.
But the only thing I got about the Lam Rim was it had elements of that, but it was more complex.
Right. You know, I didn't say a lot about the nature of the Lam Rim and how it differs. That's true. Yeah. Yeah. So we'll explain a little bit about that. That's a good question. Thanks. Yeah. Yes. So like I say, you know, the characteristic of the Lojong particularly is that it like really tries to distill the essence from the Mahayana teaching. So the Lam Rim, actually you could consider it's a presentation. It's based on the real kind of primary source for it is the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras. Okay, so the whole series of them. There's the 25,000 verse Perfection of Wisdom, 100,000 verse one. There's a 10,000 verse one, 8,000, and so on, and going right down to the Heart Sutra, which is just like about 25 verses. So this is really the sort of, can we say, the fundamental teachings of the Mahayana Buddhist tradition in those. There are others, but they are the kind of the main body of the Mahayana Buddhist teachings come from there. And also coming down to this Tibetan tradition, there's a commentary on the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras called the Abhisamaya Alamkara, the Ornament of Clear Realization. And based on that commentary, then many other, you know, commentaries were written. Also, the Shantideva's Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life is another one. So they're all really drawing on this fountainhead of the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras. But then it was put together by Atisha and then again by Tsongkhapa in this form, which is kind of takes you through it in a step-by-step sequence. Okay, so in other words, whereas the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras themselves and many of these commentaries are not really arranged in the sequence of how they're practiced, but the Lam Rim does that. So it is broken down into kind of three main stages, which are called the stage of the practitioner of the small, medium, and great scope. So the small scope is just somebody who is really practicing to avoid a suffering rebirth in the next life, want to be able to have a good rebirth. The medium scope is the practices for those who are seeking complete liberation from suffering, and then the great scope is those who are seeking full enlightenment, Buddhahood. So it goes through those and presents each one under different headings and subheadings, and then in some texts there are subheadings and subheadings, and going on to about, I think, about 10 different levels of subheadings. I don't mean to say that it, you know, it's always this complex. There's some very extensive ones, especially Lama Tsongkhapa's Lamrim, which runs to 3 volumes in English, very extensive. And then there was more condensed and more condensed. So, but really, if you study a typical kind of Lamrim text that is sort of designed to be a manual for practice, you know, like a, rather than a, you know, great sort of huge study, it will have considerably more divisions and subdivisions than the Lojong text usually has, because the Lojong text really just focus on the main point of the two, what's called the 2 bodhicittas. So I talked about conventional and ultimate bodhicitta. Okay, so the conventional bodhicitta is mainly the compassion aspect, what's called the method aspect, and the ultimate bodhicitta is mainly the wisdom aspect, the understanding of emptiness. So it's really, I mean, in a way, they both contain all the same points, you know, but it's a question of how it's structured and how, and the emphasis. So in the Lojong, they very much try to really, as I say, to distill out the essence, whereas in the Lamrim, it's a bit more sort of laid out as a step-by-step sequence, a bit more kind of extensive. But we'll get to see it as we go through, because this text combines both, so I can kind of bring that out in the teaching. But some of these Lojong texts are very, very concise, and, you know, really, I suppose one way that they do this is by talking about these 2 opponents of self-cherishing and self-grasping. So these are technical terms, you know, as Sinjin mentioned, self-cherishing perhaps doesn't really bring across the actual meaning of that term. And self-grasping is you might think that's the same, but actually it's different. And when we understand what these two mental factors are, and we can, you know, one of the points in the text as well, really, you know, all of our practice is just about eliminating those 2 mental factors, just about how, you know, really, and sometimes quite violent language, you know, really destroy that self-centered or selfish mind, and also the self-grasping, which is not so much the sort of selfishness, not so much, you know, kind of an emotional attitude or a motivation to pursue one's own well-being to the neglect of others, but it's more a perspective or a view that is very, very fixed, has a very fixed view of the self as being existing ultimately real from its own side in a way that it actually doesn't. Okay, so the Lojong really kind of tries to zero in on those 2, right? What are the different ways that we can eliminate these 2 mental attitudes, which are the cause of all our problems? Okay. So, shall we finish with a few minutes of meditation? So once again, take a few moments to settle as comfortably as possible, making any adjustments you need to make. And just listening to the body. What is it doing? What's it telling us? Where are there places of discomfort or tension? Maybe take one or two fairly deep breaths to let go of that tension. And let the mind and body come to balance, a state of rest, but remaining aware. Listening to the breathing, following the breath as it goes in and out. And just take a moment or two to reflect back on some of the essential points that we've touched on this evening. So in the meditation, we spent a little bit of time connecting with the image of the Buddha as a way of tuning our mind into the goal of our practice. Recognizing this possibility of having a mind which is completely pervaded by compassion, without discrimination for all living beings. A mind also that is completely clear and can see without any distortion exactly what needs to be done. So this is not just an image of some imaginary being or even some real being separate from ourselves that we worship, but it represents the potential of our own mind. Even more than that, it actually represents the true nature of our mind when it's not obscured by confusion or emotional distortion. So this enlightened state is our refuge. That is our direction in life, our destination, our destiny. and of course also is the source of these teachings, spiritual path. So we have been most fortunate to meet these teachings that come from this enlightened source, that have been passed down one generation after another for 2,500 years without deterioration, so that we now can practice them and attain that goal. So the essence of these teachings is this awakening mind, bodhicitta, the compassionate motivation to attain enlightenment, highest possible state of enlightenment, solely in order to free all beings from suffering. We can also add the second type of bodhicitta, ultimate bodhicitta, which is the mind understanding the wisdom of emptiness as the actual method to attain enlightenment. So even to have spent about 2 hours hearing about, meditating on, reflecting, discussing, contemplating these topics is something deeply meaningful and valuable. So please rejoice deeply that we have created causes for our own spiritual development and even full enlightenment, which will benefit not only ourselves, but limitless other beings. We can rejoice from the depths of our heart. And dedicate this positive spiritual potential that we've thus created for the benefit of all beings. We'll recite some dedication prayers, which I will share the screen. May the precious bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen never decrease, but increase more and more. Just as the brave Manjushri and Samantabhadra have realized things as they are, I dedicate all virtue in the best way so that I too may follow after them. And we'll do the next one in Tibetan. So this is the long life prayer for His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And I'm sorry I should have added the long life prayer for Lama Zopa Rinpoche, who's our own teacher. Maybe you can just make, if you know him, make a mental prayer for that, but we will recite this. Well, I will recite it. You can listen or chant along if you wish to. But if you're chanting along, then leave yourself muted, because otherwise it causes confusion, I understand. So, yeah, of course, His Holiness the Dalai Lama himself really has borne the primary responsibility for carrying these precious teachings that were preserved for more than 1,000 years in Tibet to the Western world and to the whole world. And without his extraordinary qualities and his noble efforts, we undoubtedly would not know of these teachings. So to make prayers for his long life very auspicious and very important. Gangri rawe karwe chinkam de pendang de wa malu jungwe ne jenrezi wang tenzin gatso yi jape si te badu tengyo chi. And if you'll allow me, I will also chant the prayer for Lama Zopa Rinpoche. I'm sorry I don't have it on the screen. You may know it. If so, then you can chant. Otherwise, just know that Lama Zopa Rinpoche also really embodies these teachings of selfless dedication and compassion. Really is one of the great lamas who practice these sincerely and deeply, especially the Lojong teachings. It's a really extraordinary, great example of the spirit of these teachings. Tup tsu chang jing jam gun gelwei tenzin kyong pelwei kunzo dok po zi chok sum korwei legman tu drup padak sok du je gun du jap ten chok. So thank you very much. I'm sorry we've gone a little bit over time. Hope that's okay. And thank you for coming, and hope to see you all next week. Have a very nice week.
Thanks, David.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you.
I was going to say, sorry, before you all go, yeah, I do want to send the text, scan it and send it to you all. I don't have all of your email addresses. So if I don't have your email address, would you like to just quickly put it in the chat, and I will then email everyone with that and any other information for next week.
Have a copy.
Oh, excellent. Good. Good for you, Tim.
I think I've got one in the shelf somewhere, actually. But
Oh, really? Excellent.
I think
okay.
I'm sure I have, actually.
Okay. Very good. Well, that's fortunate. Okay.
I'll have a look.
Yeah. I'm going to try to get permission to copy the whole thing and send it to everyone. Okay. Right. Thanks, Ian.
Good. I just wanted to ask as well, how do we make a donation for these sessions?
That's a good question to which I don't really know the answer. I mean, you can. I think there is on the website, on the Jamyang Leeds website, there is a donate. I think it's actually a menu item on the website, but there, yeah. Can't help feeling there should be a way that's connected to the calendar, but I don't know what it is. But that's a way you can do it anyway. Yeah, I think it's actually the last item on the menu there. So have I got everyone's there? I've got yours there, Carol. Haven't got Carol's email. Do you want to give me that, or?
Sorry, yeah, I'm new to Zoom, so I wasn't too I found the chat, but I wasn't too sure. I don't know if that's, I did send something somewhere.
Okay, looks like you didn't send it to me.
Yeah.
If you, at the bottom of the chat box where it says, you know, you'll see it says to everyone or to somebody. I don't seem to be on the list. That's odd. Well, if you just, I think it's.
Yeah, I can see that it says to everyone. Yeah.
Yeah, probably I'll be there as Jamyang Leeds, but it doesn't.
Right.
Either send it to everyone or you can send it to. I think Jamyang Leeds is what I'll be seeing as.
Oh, and then I just press enter. Got it. Yeah. That was a missing.
Thank you. Yes.
Cheers. Thanks.
I'm not Jamyang Leeds. I'm David actually, but I forgot to rename myself. Okay. Thank you very much, everyone, and we'll see you next week. Bye bye.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.